The day my daughter was born, I refused to sign. The nurse slid the birth certificate across the tray, my name printed, the pen still warm. Two mothers watched, mine stone still by the window, hers bristling at the bed. My wife cradled the baby and said, "Honey, sign." I put my palm on the paper and said, steady as steel, "Not yet. We wait for the DNA." The room went dead silent, enough to hear the air conditioner. Call me heartless, paranoid. I've worked half my life offshore, and I know when numbers don't add up. 18 years with one stroke of ink? Not without the truth. Not anymore, ever. In 72 hours, a plain envelope would decide whether I was a father or a fool. And if you think this is just jealousy, there's one more detail. The late-night emails, the stories that never matched, and a name that kept appearing on her phone, her boss. So tell me, what would you have done? My name is Jake Turner. I'm 38, born and raised on the Gulf Coast, the son of a refinery hand and a church pianist. I fix problems for a living. Offshore engineer is the title, but what I really do is keep steel and people from breaking. On land, I'm the man with a Chevy in the driveway, a grill out back, and neighbors who wave when the Saints win. I married Emily 6 years ago. We bought a modest house in Metairie where the oak trees lean over the street and the mailman knows your dog by name. I'm not flashy. I show up, pay bills, mow my lawn on Saturday mornings, and call my mother every Sunday. If you're my age, you get it. Pride is quiet. It shows up in a working truck and a paid light bill. That's who I was before the delivery room standoff. To understand it, know where I spend my life. Offshore isn't glamorous. It's loud, wet, and ruled by schedules that don't care about birthdays. 2 weeks on, 1 week off if you are lucky. The rig feels like a small town built from steel, buzzing day and night. You wake to salt air and diesel, work 12 hours, eat in a galley where every meal tastes like yesterday, then fall asleep with earplugs and a sore back. Folks think you get used to it. You don't. You learn to file the noise in a drawer and close it. What keeps you going are rituals. A photo taped inside your locker. A text from home if the weather lets the signal through. A lucky coin in your pocket on rough lifts. I learned to be calm when alarms screamed, because panic breaks more than pipe. That calm followed me home. It's the voice that said DNA first. But back then, I believed the grind bought me safety. I was wrong. Home for me is Metairie, just west of New Orleans, where live oaks shade the streets and the air smells like rain and fried shrimp. Our block is plain in the best way. Kids chalk hopscotch on the sidewalk. Men argue about the Saints over a fence while the sprinklers tick. I keep an ice chest in the garage and a set of folding chairs that know every 4th of July. On Fridays I grill, nothing fancy, just chicken and sausage, smoke curling over the fence. Emily brought out paper plates and that smile that made the week make sense. Neighbors wandered over with potato salad and we'd trade stories about roofs, taxes, and which contractor shows up. If you're over 30, you know the comfort of routine. A working porch light, a dog that barks at the same raccoon. You think habits mean safety. In my case, those habits became a blanket that hid the first cold draft. Emily and I were 6 years in, the kind of stretch where love looks like errands and inside jokes. Saturday mornings we drank coffee on the porch and traded headlines. She liked true crime podcasts. I liked quiet. On my weeks home we did the loop. Groceries, laundry, church, a drive down Veterans for po' boys if the line was short. We kept a jar for road trip money and a playlist we never finished. We argued, sure, about the thermostat, about how long I left tools on the kitchen counter, but it ended with a grin and a kiss on the cheek. People think storms announce themselves. Most don't. They start as wind under a door, a note you ignore. One fall, Emily started staying late for quarterly reporting. I nodded, proud she cared about her job. That's what a decent husband does. I told myself the calendar would even out when the baby came. I didn't see the pattern until later. My mother, Linda, taught me that love shows up in chores, not speeches. She worked days at a clinic, cooked red beans on Mondays, and kept a ledger in a spiral notebook that scared debt more than any banker. When Dad's hours were cut, she sold the piano to keep the lights on, then hummed hymns while she folded laundry so no one heard her worry. If I forgot to say yes, ma'am, she handed me a rake and pointed at the ditch. Character is built with blisters, she'd say, and she meant it. She liked Emily but never confused charm with proof. On Sundays she'd ask, "Are you two praying or just coasting?" I'd laugh it off and kiss her cheek. When I told her about the rotations, about how long I'd be gone, she said, "Then your word has to be longer." I didn't know it yet, but that word would be the last thing standing beside me. Patricia, my mother-in-law, came from a different school. She is quick, polished, and never enters a room without deciding where the conversation will land. She loves Emily fiercely, the way some mothers do when their only child still looks 12 in their eyes. Holidays at her house came with perfect napkins and gentle interrogations. "You staying safe out there, Jake? Emily says you're gone a lot." She smiled when she asked, but there was always a measuring tape behind her eyes. She called me reliable, then reminded Emily not to lift anything heavier than a purse. When our AC died one July, she bought window units before I could get home, then told the neighbors she handled it. I respected her hustle and tried not to tally points. Families work better when you pick your battles. I thought we had found a groove. I fixed things. She planned things. I didn't notice which loyalty she was sharpening yet. Put the two of them at the same table and you could feel the temperature change. Linda carried quiet rules. Patricia carried bright opinions. When Emily and I argued about money, Linda said, "Pay the mortgage first and sleep easy." Patricia said, "You work hard, enjoy the vacation." When I offered to pick up an extra hitch for Christmas, Linda warned, "Gifts fade, time doesn't." Patricia smiled. "Promotion comes to the man who says yes." None of it felt hostile. It was two currents pushing in different directions, and Emily stood where they met. Most weekends were peaceful. We ate gumbo, watched football, and teased each other about whose potato salad won. But every so often, I caught a glance between them, like coaches calling plays I didn't hear. I told myself that was family, nothing more. What I missed was the way Emily leaned toward whichever voice promised comfort today. That leaning would matter when the ink hit paper. I used to believe our home was solid, not fancy, not Instagram perfect, but sturdy the way a good pair of boots is sturdy. We had routines that felt like vows: Wednesday leftovers, Saturday yard work, Sunday phone call to my mother. I told myself that consistency was love doing its job. When Emily said she was pregnant, I cut a rotation short to paint the spare room soft yellow. I built a crib that fought me at every screw and laughed when it finally stood square. I thought effort guaranteed outcome. Most men my age are taught that. Swing the hammer and the board behaves. But families are not lumber, they're weather. They change when you are not looking. In the hospital later, with two mothers watching and a nurse holding a pen, I learned how a picture can shatter. If this sounds like a warning, it is. I ignored the draft under the door. Then the door blew open. My absences didn't start as a problem. They started as a clock. 2 weeks on the rig meant 2 weeks of Emily eating dinner alone, flipping through channels, and falling asleep to the glow of her phone. She said she was fine. She called my schedule hero hours, smiled for my mother, and told her friends I provided well. But small things told the truth. The porch light stayed on later. The coffee creamer lasted longer. Her side of the bed held its shape. On video calls, she would widen the camera, showing me the dog, the stove, the plant on the window, anything but her face for long. If you've ever spent nights without your person, you know how silence gets louder after 10. I promised weekend breakfasts and flowers, like routine could fill an empty seat. Emily nodded, grateful and tired. One night she said, "I'm proud of you," and looked away. That was loneliness learning my address. We didn't fight loud, we fought small. The dishwasher turned into a scoreboard. The thermostat became a courtroom. I'd come home tired, set my boots near the door, and Emily would say, "I just mopped." I'd apologize, move them, and pretend it ended there. Older couples told us, "Pick your battles," and we did. We picked the wrong ones. We argued about the TV volume but skipped the conversation about distance. We debated which weekend to see her mother but ignored how my schedule was grinding us down. Some evenings I reached for her shoulder in bed and she turned, not away, just distant, like I'd startled a deer. She'd say, "I'm fine," in that voice husbands recognize, the one that means the opposite. I promised to be more present. She promised to be more patient. We shook hands with our eyes and called it progress. The next rotation came. The same arguments waited by the door, wearing new coats again. We circled the idea of children for years like a boat hovering outside the dock. We'd stop in the baby aisle, touch a tiny sock, then laugh and keep walking. After 30, jokes sounded thinner. Friends hosted birthdays with bouncy houses, and we brought gifts home to a kitchen. Emily started tracking cycles on a calendar pinned to the fridge behind a grocery list. I made doctor appointments fit between hitches and told myself we had time. If you're over 30, you've felt that clock. Polite at first, then impatient. One night, Emily said, "If we wait much longer, we might miss it." And I heard fear where I wanted hope. I promised we'd try. I cut overtime, said no to a bonus, bought paint for the spare room. We practiced patience like it was a plan. It felt good to dream together, rowing the same direction. I thought a baby would glue our pieces. Pressure turned out to be solvent. I remember the night Emily told me she was pregnant. I'd just gotten back from the Gulf, clothes still smelling like salt and grease. She met me at the door with a white box wrapped in too much tape. Inside sat tiny socks, the kind you can lose in a shirt pocket. My first thought was confusion. My second was a laugh that punched through my chest. We stood in the living room, both of us talking at once, names, colors, who to call first, while the oven timer beeped somewhere and neither of us cared. I set the box on the coffee table and lifted her off the floor, spinning once like a man in a commercial. That night, we lay awake and built a life in whispers, a yellow room, feedings, a stroller in the trunk. If you've been there, you know the sweet fear. The future feels close enough to hold. I didn't see the shadow standing behind it. We went all in on the spare room. I took measurements twice and still cut one board wrong, swore under my breath and tried again. The walls turned a soft yellow that caught morning light like butter. Emily sat on the carpet with a notebook and a highlighter, reading baby names out loud like she was auditioning the future. I assembled a crib that fought me at every bolt, and when it finally stood, we both clapped like the Saints scored. We argued about strollers, about which mobile looked less ridiculous, about whether we needed a wipe warmer or common sense. I skipped a rotation, traded overtime for paint on my hands, and told my supervisor the ocean could wait. If you've ever built a room for a child you haven't met, you know it feels like building hope out of lumber. Every shelf said father. Every drawer said family. I thought love had momentum. I didn't notice the drag. Then her calendar filled up. New projects, new rollout, new team lead meetings that always seemed to land when I was home. Emily started leaving early and coming back late, talking about deliverables and quarterly cleanups, words that felt like gravel in a dinner plate. I tried not to be the guy who resents a working wife. I bragged about her to the neighbors, grilled a chicken breast, and kept her portion warm in the oven. She'd text, "Don't wait up," and I'd send a thumbs up and a heart, then stare at the living room clock like it owed me answers. Weekends shifted. Brunch with friends turned into, "I promised I'd help the team." She was tired but wired, the way people look after too much coffee and not enough rest. I told myself it was a season and seasons pass. One night I offered to pick her up from the office. She said, "No need, Mark's still here." Mark Dalton arrived like a new policy, polite on paper, disruptive in practice. He was the regional manager, the kind who remembers birthdays and quotes leadership books in the break room. Emily said he brought energy. I said that sounded like someone who emails on Sundays. The first time I met him was at a company picnic. He shook my hand long and called me brother, then asked about offshore like it was a TV show. He praised Emily in front of me, how she kept the team on deadline, how her reports were clean. Compliments are fine. Precision is intimate. I clocked it and let it pass. Men learn to choose silence when the room is crowded. Later, Emily's calendar filled with Dalton check-ins. She started wearing a blazer she'd once called uncomfortable. I told myself it was ambition, not attention. On my hitch, she texted, "Don't worry if I'm late tonight, we're closing a quarter." The pronoun bothered me. Signs rarely arrive as sirens. They arrive as patterns. Emily's phone lived face down on the counter. Her laughter on speaker calls turned careful when I walked in. She stopped leaving receipts in the junk drawer. Little things, like she was cleaning the trail behind her. At night, her laptop glowed from the couch, blue light on her cheeks, and I'd hear the keyboard at midnight, then again at 2. When I asked what was so urgent, she said quarter-end audits, then scrolled past the answer. Emails from Mark stacked up, subject lines that sounded like code. Touch base, circle back, late window. I told myself corporate folks write dull emails and let it go. But dates kept bumping into my offshore schedule, like two trains sharing a track. She wore perfume to grab coffee with a coworker. She took the long way home. If you're over 30, your gut whispers before your brain admits it. Mine started whispering names. I didn't open her phone. I didn't follow her car. I told myself marriage means believing the best when you can't prove the worst. Older men taught me that trust is a choice you make before the evidence shows up, because if you wait for proof, you're already lost. So I stacked reasons like sandbags. She's tired. The project is heavy. The boss is needy. I reminded myself she'd held me through layoffs and hurricanes. I replayed our porch mornings, our grocery runs, the crib we built on a humid Saturday until the story felt solid again. When a friend from the rig said, "Keep your eyes open," I joked and changed the subject. The truth is, I was scared of the answer. If you've suspected the ground might give, you press your heel down harder, testing, pretending it will hold. That week, I bought flowers, made dinner, and turned down a hitch. I chose trust. The cracks chose otherwise. Labor started before sunrise, a slow drum that turned into sirens by noon. We drove across Jefferson Highway to Oxnard Medical Center, lights blurring through rain. Nurses met us with blankets and names that sounded practiced. Emily squeezed my hand until the world narrowed to breath, count, push. If you've ever stood helpless beside someone you love in pain, you know the uselessness of strong hands. Monitors blinked green like tiny metronomes. I answered forms, fetched ice chips, cracked bad jokes that landed flat. Hours stretched, then collapsed. The room filled, then shrank. A doctor appeared, calm as a winter lake, and said, "Almost there." Emily nodded, jaw set, a warrior in a paper gown. I kissed her forehead and tasted salt. For a moment the doubts went quiet, drowned by work older than language. When the shift finally came, I remembered every prayer my mother ever taught me. I said all of them, out loud, twice, for good measure. The cry arrived like a thin wire pulled through the room, sharp, electric, undeniable. Everything stopped. Machines, footsteps, even the old clock above the sink. At least that's how it felt. I have heard alarms in storms and the bang of steel under strain. Nothing touched this sound. It cut me open and stitched me up in the same breath. They placed the baby on Emily's chest, skin to skin, tiny back rising like a sparrow learning air. I forgot the calendar, the emails, the strange late nights. My chest broke in a good way. I counted fingers I hadn't earned yet, traced a nose that might have been mine. The nurse laughed when I cried and handed me a towel like she'd done it 1,000 times. "She's perfect," someone said. I believed it. For one pure minute, the future lifted its hands and promised peace. Then a clipboard entered the doorway, and the old world returned, patient, waiting for me. Not long after, our mothers arrived like weather fronts from different states. Linda, my mother, stood by the window with her purse tucked under her arm, face calm, eyes bright, taking inventory the way nurses do. Patricia, Emily's mother, swept in with the confidence of someone who fixes problems by talking faster than they happen. She kissed Emily's hair, adjusted the blanket, rearranged the flowers, thanked the staff by first name, then looked at me like a foreman checking a crew. I don't say this to mock her. Some people lead with motion. Linda leads with stillness. Between them, the room found a balance I recognized from holidays. Discipline on one side, decoration on the other. The baby sighed. Emily smiled. For a beat, it felt like family. Fragile, but standing. I breathed, tried to memorize it, held my tongue on every doubt. Then Patricia asked, light as sugar, "Have you signed the paperwork yet?" The balance tilted toward me. A nurse rolled in with a clipboard and a practiced smile, the kind you trust until you read the form. "Just a few signatures," she said, like we were closing on a cable package. The birth certificate sat on a metal tray, my name already printed in neat black letters beneath father. The pen lay across the top like a seal waiting for wax. She highlighted lines with a yellow marker and tapped where to sign, explaining copies, timelines, mailings, things I half heard. Emily shifted the baby and nodded toward me. "Honey, go ahead." Patricia added a bright, "Let's make it official." Linda stayed silent, eyes on my hands, not the page. I picked up the pen, felt its weight, remembered contracts offshore that cost less than this. 18 years in one stroke is a big promise. I set the pen down, then picked it up again, as if motion could buy me time. The nurse kept smiling, patient. In that moment, it almost felt like the commercial's promise. The baby drifting to sleep, Emily smoothing the blanket with that new, careful touch, Patricia arranging flowers like a victory parade, Linda resting a hand on my shoulder without words. The hospital room hummed with a soft, easy rhythm, machine steady, hallway quiet, afternoon light warming the tile. I told myself this was the picture I'd worked for, long hitches traded for this clean, bright proof of family. I could hear a game on a distant TV, a laugh at a nurse's station, a cart rolling by like a reminder that normal life still existed. Emily said, "We're okay," almost a whisper, as if speaking too loud might wake the future. I wanted to believe her. I needed to. I squeezed her ankle through the sheet, a small promise. The nurse waited with patience I mistook for kindness. Then the pen felt heavier, like it knew more than I did already. Pressure doesn't always shout. Sometimes it smiles. The nurse kept her kind voice and pointed again where my name belonged. Patricia brightened. "It's just paperwork, Jake." She looked at the clock like it had a deadline. Emily adjusted the baby and gave me that small, practiced nod couples use in restaurants when it's time to order. Linda studied the window, arms crossed, saying nothing, but I felt her question floating between us. I tested the pen in my fingers, wrote a straight line on the corner of the consent sheet, and watched the ink behave perfectly. The room leaned toward me, subtle as a tide. I thought of mortgages, birthdays, the crib that fought me, the yellow paint still on my knuckles. I thought of every man I know who signed because that's what you do. My hand moved over the line. The nib touched down. Somewhere a monitor beeped. I drew one breath and stopped halfway through, on purpose. I set the pen back on the tray like it might burn a hole in my hand. Emily's eyes searched my face, looking for the easy husband I'd always been. Patricia tried to turn the moment with charm. "Sweetheart, he's exhausted. Let's help him finish." The nurse nodded sympathetically as if I were a man afraid of forms. But this wasn't paper. It was a mortgage on a life. Offshore taught me to pause when numbers don't match. You don't spin a bolt into misaligned threads just because the clock says so. I stared at the name beneath father and heard the hiss of air conditioning like surf. Linda's voice, quiet as a pew, finally came. "Jake?" One syllable. Permission to think. I picked up the pen again, rolled it between my fingers, felt its tiny rattle. Then I laid it down, palm flat beside the form, and said, clear as a bell, "Not yet." The room held its breath. I looked at Emily, then at the nurse, and let my voice land without heat. "We wait for the DNA." Not a shout, not an accusation, just a rule, like checking a gauge before you start a pump. Silence fell hard enough to hear the fluorescent lights buzzing. The nurse's smile faded into protocol. Patricia's mouth opened, then closed, like she had to choose between arguing and breathing. Emily's lips trembled. Linda didn't move. Somewhere in the hallway a cart rolled past, wheels squeaking like mice. I kept my hand on the table, steady as steel. "I'll sign when science says I'm the father." It felt like throwing a line around a storm. The nurse cleared her throat and nodded once. "You have that right." Patricia chose anger. Emily chose tears. I chose oxygen, slow and measured. If you've ever drawn a boundary late, you know it shakes the whole house. The wall held. The pictures rattled anyway, all around us. The air changed first. Not colder, just tighter, like someone cinched a belt around the room. Emily held the baby closer, eyes shining, jaw set against a truth she didn't want to name. Patricia stepped forward, voice bright with fury. "How dare you!" Linda stayed at the window, fingers resting on the sill as if she were steadying the building. The nurse stood by the door, trapped between policy and people. I didn't move. Offshore taught me to let silence work. You don't argue with steel, you read it. In that silence, 100 small tells spoke at once. Emily folding the same edge of the blanket, Patricia tilting her chin higher, Linda tracking my breathing without looking. The monitor ticked. The HVAC hummed. A light flickered once and came back. I thought about ink drying on a promise and watched the pen like it might crawl away. Then Emily looked up finally and searched my face for mercy there. Her eyes told the story her mouth couldn't hold. Fear first, then outrage rehearsed too quickly, then a plea she hadn't chosen yet. The baby shifted, made a small sound, and Emily tightened her grip, like the child could shield her from arithmetic. "You're humiliating me," she said, voice thin, volume high, the way people talk when they want the hallway to testify. Patricia echoed her, words like nails. Linda finally turned from the window and leveled me with the look she used when I was 12. "Are you sure?" I was. Not about guilt, about process. "A test settles it," I said. Emily shook her head too hard, fighting tears, fighting gravity. "You don't trust me." I didn't answer. I watched her eyes, the way they flinched when I said Mark Dalton's name out loud. A tiny pause, a missed beat, the kind men learn to hear when lies scrape metal. The room tilted again, and hope slid off center. Patricia moved first. She planted herself between the bed and the tray like a traffic cop and aimed her voice at me. "How dare you question your wife on the happiest day of her life?" The baby stirred at the pitch. The nurse shifted a step, then froze. I kept both hands on the table, feeling the cool steel under my palm. Anger is easy. Accuracy is harder. Patricia wasn't asking for truth. She was asking for speed. "It's a signature, Jake. A signature means family." She smiled, but her eyes ran audits. "I've seen foremen push men to turn a wrench one more time, even when the threads are wrong. That's how steel snaps." I said nothing and watched the door. If you've made hard calls, you know silence doesn't mean doubt. It means you're listening. Patricia misread it as weakness and raised her chin. "Sign." The word landed like a slap the room pretended not to hear. Linda didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She has the kind of quiet that makes people check their math. She stood by the window, purse looped over her forearm, eyes on the glass like she was reading the sky. When I was a boy, that look meant I'd better reconsider my story before she asked the second question. She watched my breathing, counted the seconds I held the air after DNA. Patricia threw heat. Linda measured pressure. The nurse glanced at her, then at me, as if permission lived in our corner. Emily avoided my eyes and stroked the baby's back, the small rhythm of a woman trying to keep time. "Jake," Linda said finally, one word like a level on a plank. Not a command, a check. Did my bubble read true? I met her gaze and nodded. Years of rakes stood behind that nod. She turned back to the window. The room felt graded, square, plumb. Emily went straight to outrage, the kind that sounds brave until you notice the tremble. "You think I'd cheat?" she said, louder than the room required. "On today of all days?" She kept talking without waiting for answers, stacking words like sandbags. "He's been offshore too long, he's paranoid, he's humiliating me." I let it pass, like waves hitting a seawall. You don't argue the ocean, you anchor to something solid. "We'll do the test," I said. She shook her head hard, then smiled at the nurse, a smile meant for an audience. "This is ridiculous." Patricia nodded, happy to play chorus. Linda watched Emily's hands instead of her face. They wouldn't stop fussing with the blanket, folding the same corner, over and over, trying to fix cloth that wasn't broken. "I trust you," Emily said finally, softer, as if saying it made it true. She glanced at the tray. "Sign, Jake." The pen glittered like bait in bright water. I didn't raise my voice. I raised a name. "Mark Dalton." It hit the air like a dropped wrench. Emily blinked before she could stop herself. Clearly. Patricia's head turned toward me like a weather vane snapping in wind. The nurse stared at the floor. Linda didn't move. I kept my eyes on Emily. "Your boss," I added, calm, almost helpful. I wanted the record to be clean. "He's a supervisor," she said too fast. "He's married." Facts used as paint. "Married men can type," I said, "and call after 11. I didn't list every time the subject lines lined up with my hitches. Not yet. I let the name sit between us and do its work. If you've ever cracked a bolt loose, you know the first sound it makes. It isn't loud. It's honest. Emily stopped folding the blanket and stared at the baby's ear like answers live there. The pen rolled an inch and stopped against steel. She tried to smile, the kind people wear at church when the question is too close. Mark mentors everyone, she said. He believes in the team. I thought about the company picnic, his long handshake, the way he praised her reports to me instead of to her. Compliments travel strange when they skip the person who earned them. Emily finally looked at me straight on, as if daring me to say more. This is jealousy, she said. Maybe, but jealousy doesn't track dates. Experience does. Men my age learn to read the half-beat when a story trips. They learn to hear the extra breath before a no. Emily took that breath. He's just my boss, she said, softer, closing the door she'd left open. I decided to open a different one. Then you won't mind the dates, I said. Because dates tell on us. The room didn't like that sentence. The nurse found a chart. Patricia found volume, fast. Patricia leaned into her training. Solve it with sound. Absolutely not, she said, hands slicing the air. You're attacking her when she's vulnerable. You will not smear a good man's name. She meant Mark, but the room heard a different defense. Linda didn't answer Patricia. She stepped closer to Emily and asked the smallest, hardest question in the English language. Sweetheart, is there any reason that name should be in this room at all? No threat, no sermon, just a door with an exit sign. Emily looked at ceiling tile like a lifeguard might be hiding there. The nurse shifted her weight from foot to foot, signaling she'd seen this movie. I kept my voice even. We can be done in 72 hours, I said. Science does the talking. Patricia rolled her eyes at word science like I'd brought a wrench to a dinner party. Family is trust, she snapped. So is proof, I said, and set my jaw. I didn't bring a detective's board. I brought dates and common sense. First week of July, I was offshore. No shore leave, no flights. That's when her team dinners began. In August, I worked 3 straight weekends. Those were the weekends Emily started training new hires. Receipts moved from the junk drawer to the trash. Mileage on her car stayed high even when the gas bill didn't. Emails from Mark stacked up after 10 p.m. Always with a soft subject line. Touch base, quick sync, late window. Old men taught me, if it walks like overtime but smells like cologne, it isn't payroll. I laid out my hitch calendar on the tray. Every time I was surrounded by ocean, her stories got vaguer. Every time I came home, the details snapped back like a bent tape. This is harassment, Patricia said. This is math, I answered. I've never won an argument with a tide chart. I don't plan to start here. Emily's voice thinned into pleading. Stop making patterns out of nothing. Mark helps the whole team. He promised. She clipped the word in half like it burned her tongue. Promised what? To keep quiet? To be careful? To make it all go away if the timing went wrong? The questions didn't leave my mouth. They hung in the air because everyone heard the same sentence finish. Patricia blinked hard, like a light had flickered behind her eyes. Linda finally turned to face Emily, not me. The nurse studied the wall clock and found it very interesting. I didn't move toward Emily. I didn't move away. Offshore taught me that when a valve starts to scream, you don't twist randomly. You listen. Emily swallowed and tried to rebuild the wall 1 brick at a time. He promised more coaching. He promised a promotion track. Her voice wavered on promised again. The word kept returning like a homing bird to guilt itself. Silence followed like a verdict. Patricia's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her hand tightened on the bed rail until her knuckles matched the sheets. Linda didn't gloat. She breathed, deep and sad, the way women breathe when the answer they prayed against finally arrives. The nurse stepped back to give the truth more room. Emily looked at me, then looked through me, past me, anywhere but at the sentence she had let slip. I kept my voice level. Who promised you what, Emily? Not a trap, a ledger line. Her lips trembled and closed. You're twisting me, she whispered. I shook my head. I'm repeating you. She reached for a new story and found none. Older folks know the sound a lie makes when it runs out of road. It doesn't crash, it stalls. Patricia touched her daughter's shoulder, not to comfort, but to confirm. Emily? She asked, and the room waited for either mercy or math now. The fight left her face all at once. Emily folded over the baby, tears falling into the blanket like rain into a river already swollen. "Please," she said, the word dragging everything behind it. Fear, shame, the picture she'd built and could not hold. "Don't do this here. Not today. Not in front of them." Patricia tried to build a wall with words, but her voice came out thin. Linda stood with both hands on the foot of the bed, steadying more than furniture. I stayed where I was. "One test," I said. "Then we all know." Emily shook her head until the monitor beeped in protest. "I was lonely," she whispered. "It was a mistake." "It's over." Over is not an answer when a form asks for father. The nurse cleared her throat, offered water, and retreated again. Emily looked up at me, mascara running, eyes begging for the man who never said no. "Jake, please." The pen waited, patient. I left before midnight, the kind of hour when hospitals feel like bus stations for souls. The automatic doors sighed, and humid air wrapped my face like a wet towel. I didn't look back. In the parking lot, the streetlights turned every car into a question. I drove past our block slow, the yellow nursery light burning like a porch lamp for a man who didn't live there anymore. My mother called once. I let it ring, then texted, "I'm okay." I wasn't. At the apartment, I set my keys on the counter and listened to the fridge hum. It was the first sound of a new life, small and stubborn. I opened the spare drawer and pulled out a folder with a lawyer's card I swore I'd never need. Old men say, when a bridge burns, don't stand in the smoke. I sat at the kitchen table, turned the card over, and dialed. The line clicked. A future answered. He picked up on the second ring, voice steady like a metronome. "Tell me what happened," he said, and I did, without embroidery. Offshore work teaches you to report clean, what failed, when, and why the gauge lied. He asked for dates, accounts, the house deed, the car title. "Separate finances now," he said. "Change passwords, screenshot everything. Do not sign anything tonight." People think lawyers sell fights. The good ones sell clarity. I wrote a list, the kind you make when the storm siren sounds and you've got 6 minutes to move photos and pets. He explained temporary orders, custody language I'd never spoken out loud, and what the DNA would do to the math. When we hung up, my hands shook like I'd finally let myself be tired. I brewed coffee I didn't drink and watched the cup steam anyway. My phone buzzed once. Emily, then again. Patricia. I turned it face down. The list on my table didn't blink. The next night I met Tom at a sports bar off Veterans, the kind with Saints flags, sticky high tops, and a waitress who calls everyone baby. Tom's a rig man too, hands scarred, eyes honest. He slid me a beer and didn't ask how I was. Men our age talk sideways when the wound is fresh. We watched baseball highlights nobody cared about. Then he cleared his throat. "Heard a name," he said. "Dalton." The room got smaller. "From who?" He tipped his chin like a man pointing at weather. "From enough." He told me things I didn't want to know. Late nights, office whispers, married women who started wearing new perfume to book club. He said the pattern was older than my marriage and colder than my pride. I took a slow drink that tasted like aluminum. If you've ever had your worst suspicion confirmed by a friend who'd rather talk fishing, you know the mercy in his careful sentences. Then he said, "You're not the only one." Tom laid out names I recognized from Christmas parties, women who'd once asked me about offshore life like it was a reality show. He said Dalton liked husbands who traveled, schedules he could set his watch by. "He's not tripping into trouble," Tom said. "He's hunting." I felt stupid for calling it coincidence. Stupid is a clean word for what I felt. Tom told me about a near miss in his own house, the way his wife put her ring on a chain for a week and called it swelling. He said he trusted her because she said no fast, then told him slow. He stared at the condensation sliding down his glass and said he wanted to punch something but settled for mowing his yard twice. That's what grown men do. We mow. We count boards. We keep our hands busy because our hearts are stupidly brave. I said, "We need facts." He nodded. "They'll find us." The door opened and a uniform walked in with a face I knew from the neighborhood. Mike Harris, patrol sergeant, 2 kids, a lawn cut in clean stripes. He saw us and came straight over like a man who forgot how to circle. He didn't order. He put his hands on the back of a chair and said, "My wife, Dalton." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He laid out the late nights, the mentoring sessions, the sudden new blouses that came with receipts she couldn't show. "I check the logs because that's my job," he said, eyes dry, voice low. "Texts past midnight, calls that drop when I step in the room." He looked at the TV, not at me. "We're separated." I recognized the sound of a man holding a dam with his back. He said he wasn't here for a fight. He was here for a map. If he's running routes, I want them on paper. We weren't alone for long. Dan Foster slipped in, a grease-knuckled shop foreman who can rebuild a carburetor by feel. He didn't sit right away. He scanned the room for exits, then joined us like a man entering a church he doesn't trust but needs. "Jessica," he said, and the name did all the work. He told us about inventory nights that required heels, about a phone bill that bloomed, then hid. He wasn't here to confess. He was here to confirm. Dalton again, always Dalton, the common thread through marriages that looked different from the street and broke the same from the inside. We put our phones face up, calendars open like maps across a table. Tom circled weekends. Mike marked night shifts. Dan traced the weeks his shop ran short-handed. I laid my offshore rotations down like railroad ties. Lines crossed, patterns aligned. If you've ever seen separate puzzles click into one picture, you know the sound it makes. Relief and anger, braided. We didn't form a club. We formed a promise. No fists, no midnight visits, no dumb stunts that end with cuffs. Just truth. Gathered, checked, and shared with the people who deserve it most. Mike said, "Chaos helps him." Tom said, "Silence helps him more." We agreed to neither. We built a list, dates, times, places, texts. We wrote rules on a napkin like teenagers making a band. No rumors, no names outside the circle without proof, no talking when drunk. Dan snorted and said, "So never," and it helped to laugh once. Older men at the bar watched us the way veterans watch a new fire, with respect and worry. I felt something shift in my spine, the way it does when a load sits right. Betrayal isolates you. Brotherhood breaks the spell. We didn't hug. We didn't pray out loud. We tapped the table once, each of us, like a vow. Then Mike said, "Next step, build the case." We went methodical. Mike knew what public records you can pull without crossing lines. Tom knew which coworkers talk when you ask them about anything but the thing. Dan knew how to read a maintenance log and find what's missing. I brought offshore calendars and a stubborn memory. We matched off-sites to my hitches, team dinners to game nights, training weekends to Mike's doubles. We didn't chase ghosts, we underlined facts. When someone offered a story, we asked for the receipt. When a rumor walked in, we checked the shoes it wore. I called my mother and told her we were keeping it clean. She said, "Good, that way the truth doesn't need help." Patricia texted me 3 paragraphs about forgiveness and family. I stared at the bubble and didn't answer. The napkin with our rules soaked up a ring of beer and kept holding. We were not building revenge. We were building light. Light does its own work. The plan was simple. Tell the men who needed telling. Not to humiliate, not to burn down offices, but to give husbands the information we wished someone had given us. Mike would handle sensitive conversations where badges help calm panic. Tom would reach the plant guys who don't check email but check each other. Dan knew the garage crowd, the ones who swap parts and information. I'd talk to offshore families where calendars decide marriages. We practice sentences that don't light matches. Check your dates. Ask to see the thread. Look at the weeks you were gone. Older folks know this truth. Most change starts as a private decision. We didn't need a brawl. We needed 100 quiet eyes opened in kitchens after the kids went to bed. Rumors burn fast and die hollow. Facts take longer and last. We shook hands like contractors at a job site. Then Mike's phone buzzed, face going tight. He said, "You need to hear this." Mike stepped away, answered, and came back with a look I've only seen at crash scenes. "He's sloppy," he said. "Got warned at work for boundaries. HR can smell smoke." Tom exhaled hard through his nose, the way men do when the problem finally has a file number. Dan said, "So it's starting." I felt anger reach for my hands and made it sit. The plan was the plan. Truth, not theater. Still, the air in the bar tilted, like pressure before a storm. A text lit my screen from an unknown number. Dalton isn't careful. You're not alone. No name, no need. Outside, a siren woke, wailed, and faded toward the lake. We gathered our papers, slid phones into pockets, and stood like men who had decided something they couldn't undecide. "We do this right," Mike said, "or someone will do it wrong." We nodded. The TV called a final score. The bartender wiped a ring from our table, leaving a clean circle where the wet had been. 3 days later, a courier handed me a plain envelope. No drama, no stamp big enough for what it carried. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where we circled baby names, and tore it open. My eyes went straight to the line that mattered. Probability of paternity, 0 or 0.00%. The room didn't spin. It narrowed. The fridge hummed like a stubborn witness. I read it again, in case numbers could grow mercy the second time. They didn't. I folded the page, unfolded it, then laid it flat so the truth could breathe. People imagine rage. What I felt first was the cold. It moved in behind my ribs and sat down. I texted my mother, "Come to Patricia's." Then I picked up the envelope and drove. The nursery window was still lit when I parked, a square of yellow on a house that wasn't mine anymore. Inside, 3 women looked up. I held out the paper like evidence. Patricia's living room smelled like lemon cleaner and fear. Emily sat on the couch with the baby tucked in the crook of her arm, eyes swollen, mouth set. Linda stood near the doorway, every inch of her saying, "Don't rush, don't stall." I didn't sit. I opened the envelope and read the sentence out loud because some words need air to finish their work. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. Emily flinched, then folded over the child as if she could hide inside the blanket. Patricia covered her mouth and stared at me like I had written the numbers myself. Linda let out a breath that sounded like a prayer losing its last argument. I placed the page on the coffee table and stepped back, a witness to my own life. "She's not mine," I said, and felt the floor choose sides. Nobody shouted. Sometimes the loudest moment in a house is the one where nothing moves anymore. Emily's shoulders shook, the kind of trembling that steals words before they form. She kissed the baby's head, whispering apologies to someone who couldn't understand and to someone who understood too well. "I'm sorry," she said to the floor, the couch, the years. Patricia knelt beside her and reached for the page like she could argue with ink. Her mouth worked, but no sentence arrived. Control had left the building. Linda didn't move toward me or away. She placed both hands on the back of a chair as if bracing the furniture for impact. I thought I'd feel triumph. I felt a funeral, not of a child, of a picture. All the Saturdays and barbecue smoke and yellow paint on my hands seemed to step outside and wait for instructions that wouldn't come. Emily looked up, eyes raw. "Please, Jake, don't leave me like this." The baby made a small, hiccuping sound, and the room contracted around it, helpless and listening. Linda broke the silence with a sentence she'd never wasted on me before. "There's nothing left to save." Not cold, not cruel, final, like a doctor closing a chart. Patricia turned toward her, ready to fight, then saw the truth had already sat down between us and took her seat beside it. Emily wiped her face with the back of her hand and kept rocking, like motion could undo math. I stayed standing. Standing keeps you from saying things you'll spend 10 years taking back. "I'll make arrangements," I said, voice flat because flat does less harm. "You'll have what you need for the child. We'll talk through counsel." Patricia flinched at the word counsel. It translated to boundaries. Linda picked up the envelope, slid the page in carefully, and handed it back to me the way nurses hand a man his wallet after surgery. "Go rest," she said. "Tomorrow you'll need a list." I nodded. Lists are bridges when roads fail. The next morning began with coffee I didn't taste and a pen I could trust. My lawyer slid forms across his desk, explaining each line like a foreman walking me through a scaffold. Property, accounts, temporary orders, words that dissolve a family into boxes you can carry. He didn't rush. He didn't soothe. He kept us on rails. I initialed where initials lived, signed where signatures mattered, and left the spaces blank that no longer belonged to me. The DNA result made the math simple. Simple isn't the same as easy. When we reached custody, he paused, met my eyes, and nodded once, a small mercy for a man who arrived with a father's heart and left with a neighbor's obligations. I pressed the pen down hard enough to leave a groove in the wood beneath the paper. When we finished, he gathered the stack and said, "You're done for today." I stood, lighter and older in the same breath. By the end of the week, Dalton's name traveled faster than traffic on veterans. Not headlines, not posts, kitchen talk. You could hear it in line at the hardware store, in whispers after church, in the way men nodded to each other like folks do when they finally have a word for the thing that's been scratching at their doors. Tom told a guy at the plant to check your dates. Mike had quiet conversations on porches where badges stayed in pockets. Dan let a story slip at the garage and watched it land like a socket finding the right bolt. None of us pointed fingers in public. We didn't need to. Men went home, opened calendars, found gaps that matched. Women stopped laughing at his jokes. HR started asking better questions. The pressure didn't explode. It seeped, then soaked, then sagged the ceiling. If you've ever watched a lie lose oxygen, you know the sound. Not a bang, a hiss. It turned ugly one night, the way rot finally reaches daylight. Word reached us before any feed did. Dalton had been found outside his subdivision, bruised, dazed, wrists scraped, mumbling about shadows. The report called it an accident. Men who fix things for a living call that labeling. I didn't ask who or how or why the damage sat low, where walking hurts. I didn't need the details, and I don't celebrate them. There's a difference between truth and punishment, and I had already chosen mine. Still, the town drew its own conclusion. A man can outrun questions, not consequences. In the bar, someone said, "Some debts don't get paid in court," then stared at his beer like it fought back. I went home and stood in my dark kitchen with my hands flat on the counter, breathing evenly until my pulse matched the fridge. Anger kept asking for my keys. I didn't give them. Not that night. Not ever. In the back of my closet sat a 3-pound sledge I'd used to break up tile when we remodeled the bathroom. I hadn't touched it in years. After the news about Dalton, I took it down and turned it in my hands. The weight made sense in a way feelings didn't. Men my age trust tools because they tell the truth about force and direction. I pictured swinging until the world quieted and knew that picture was a lie that ruins lives. I set the hammer on the dresser and watched it sit there like a dare. There's a moment when anger pretends to be justice. It wears your voice and borrows your walk. If you haven't met that moment yet, I hope you never do. I picked the hammer up, felt the pull in my shoulder, then carried it to the truck without deciding why. The Gulf was waiting. So was a choice I wanted to make only once. Night at sea looks like forever poured flat. I stood on the aft deck with the hammer cold in my hand and the rig humming under my boots. The wind tasted like salt and diesel and second chances. I thought about every man at that table, about Emily crying into a blanket, about a child who needed stability more than a headline. I thought about my mother's ledger and how she balanced pain by doing the next right thing. Then I did the math I trust. If I kept this weight, I'd carry it into every room I entered. If I let it go, I might have a hand free for a future. I lifted the hammer, felt my shoulder remember high school baseball, and let it fall in a clean arc. The splash was small. The quiet afterward wasn't. I watched the circles fade, then breathed like a man who had picked a direction and meant it this time. Peace didn't arrive with trumpets. It showed up in small errands. I learned to cook more than eggs. I fixed a leaky faucet and didn't announce it. I slept through a storm without dreaming of alarms. Months later, at a friend's backyard barbecue, I met Lily. No fireworks, just a steady voice and eyes that didn't rush me. She asked about offshore and didn't try to turn it into a movie. We walked the block with paper plates and talked about dogs we'd lost and parents we missed. She didn't offer advice. She offered presence. If you've ever healed from something you didn't cause, you know the gift of not being handled. We added Saturdays at the farmer's market, coffee mugs that learned to live in the same cabinet, and silence that felt like safety, not distance. I told her the truth in chapters, not headlines. She listened all the way to the period and said, "Okay, I'm here. Now." I won't pretend the past vanished. It travels with me like a faint scar under a shirt, felt more than seen, tender in cold weather. But scars aren't chains. They don't own the next mile. I keep a copy of the DNA result in a file I don't open, not to punish myself, but to remember what truth costs and saves. Emily and I speak through counsel when needed. Patricia sends holiday cards with perfect penmanship. Linda asks about Lily and brings over gumbo for the freezer that never survives a week. I drive by the old house sometimes and ask God to keep that child safe and brave. When anger knocks, I let it stand on the porch until it gets bored and leaves. You learn the slow skills after 50 storms. Breathe, bless, build. I'm still that man who checks gauges. I just check my heart first. The question remains, and it belongs to you. What would you do? Here's what I know now. Healing isn't forgetting. It's choosing the next honest brick and laying it, even when your hands still shake. I kept my name off a line, I let a hammer sink, and I learned to breathe where the air once burned. If you're 30 or 60 and carrying your own wreckage, this is my hand on your shoulder. You are not the sum of someone else's lies. You get to rebuild, slow, simple, steady. Call your mother, fix the hinge, make dinner, tell the truth, protect the child. Bless the day you walk away from rage. That's my road. But this part is yours. In that delivery room, would you have signed to keep the peace, demanded DNA like I did, or walked for good before the envelope? Choose your lane and tell me why. Type 1 for sign, 2 for DNA, 3 for walk. Then give the reason a man can stand on. What would you do?